Every time I try to push the limit of how little you can pay and still get an enjoyable, reliable timepiece on your wrist, I always keep it to one watch per brand for the sake of variety, but threaten that I could just populate the entire list with Casios and be done with it. Well, I think it's time I put that to the test. There is a difference here though. Sometimes in those other videos I've had to add a watch, and indeed a brand, out of the necessity caused by the budgetary requirement of the video. Whereas if you've seen my watch brand ranking, Casio were rated as high as it gets. I don't just think they are a good budget option, I genuinely love the brand, and I think they bring digital pieces to life in a way that other companies simply do not. I've even made a retrospective look at the history of the company, if that's something you're interested in hearing more about. With all that said, I did still follow a couple of basic rules when putting together this video, and they are: each watch must be a Casio, and each watch must be available for less than $100 at the time of writing. With all that said, let's get into the video. While there aren't official figures available, it is estimated that since its release in 1989, Casio has sold north of 80 million F91Ws, making it one of the most popular and widespread watch models of all time. It's hard to be definitive as to whether or not it is the most sold watch of all time though, as Rolex have been making the sub for a very long time and don't release precise figures either. I dare say either way it's been overtaken by the Apple Watch, but one thing we can say for sure, it's absolutely iconic, costs next to nothing, and should act as a barometer for quality for any other budget purchases that you want to make. I bought one of these about 6 months ago with the intention of making a video about watches in the Alien franchise. My god, I love those first two movies, and actually the most recent one's not so bad either. However, I managed to lose the watch within a day or two of owning it. Fairly sure it was actually stolen from an airport security scanner. I could have lost far more expensive pieces, but it was still very annoying. As you can see, I've bought another, and I'm trying and failing to recreate the feel of the first film with these shots. Still a long way to go with that video, but a fantastic looking watch for such a low asking price. While it definitely doesn't have the film credentials of the A100, I think this particular version of the F108 fits very well into that 80s science fiction aesthetic that I think is really crucial to the design of a digital watch. It gives me a lot of nostalgia to my childhood in the 90s, where I felt the value of a gadget was defined almost entirely by what it could do. For example, if your trainers lit up, pumped up, or even just had air in them, that was amazing, and something as basic as a backlight on a watch is something that you could sit and play with for hours. In the modern day, sure, it still has some of that nostalgia, but it's also available in a lot of colorways if you wanted to match it to a specific style or outfit. Releasing back in 2012, the AE1200 range is the first tangible upgrade on the basic functionality you expect from a Casio digital model to feature on this list. It offers world time functionality, supported with a small digital map as a visual indicator for the time zone being displayed. It also boasts 100 meters of water resistance, 5 separate alarms, a 1/100th of a second stopwatch, again with its own display, and a day-date sub-display. In essence, it can display a lot of information at once, with the side benefit of making you look like you could call in a tactical strike with the press of its buttons. I was torn between featuring the A168 or the A158 on the list, as I feel they are definitely too similar to feature both. In the end, I couldn't actually decide, as there are pros and cons to both models, so I literally flipped a coin and ended up with the brushed, more minimalist and crucially smaller and lighter A158. I do love both watches though, and it is worth flagging up that the illumination on the light on the A168 is better, and you could argue that the design is slightly more iconic. But I don't think there's a great deal in it, and personally would shop with wrist size in mind as the biggest deciding factor between the two. Earlier on, I was waxing lyrical about growing up in the 90s and gadgets being defined by what they could do. Well, outside of maybe the Seiko TV watch, which would have been very rare on most playgrounds, the calculator watch was about as cool as it got back then. Not only could you use it to cheat in maths, but you could also waste an inordinate amount of time coming up with sequences of questions that eventually led to the watch spelling out something vaguely rude. I still think it's cool to this day, not to mention potentially useful. As a kid, I always wondered what the point of doing maths was, but as an adult who resorts to a calculator for even embarrassingly easy calculations rather than having to actually think, I kind of get it now. Ani Digi display watches have been around since the launch of the Seiko H357 back in 1978, and were brought into the spotlight when the model was worn by James Bond in For Your Eyes Only. While I'm a big lover of GMT watches, I do think an Ani Digi display is perhaps the fastest and indeed most straightforward way of actively taking on board two time zones. After a long haul flight, sometimes my mind is like mush, so I do think there are occasions where this is helpful. To me though, it's the design of this watch that really appeals. I can picture it on the wrist of a businessman from the 80s who just wants something to help him work with another branch overseas. I'm yet to own one, but I think it's just a matter of time. When it comes to bargain hunting, one page to always keep your eye out for is the Casio sale page, as when discounts are available, models sell out very quickly. This edifice model, for example, was available at the time of writing at a 50% discount. The edifice range itself is designed to offer more professional, racing-inspired analog office watches than Casio's usual fare. If you like the 70s inspired sports watch look, this chronograph is about as good as it's going to get in a watch you can guarantee will be reliable given its maker at this low price point. Now, I'll be honest, I couldn't hope to pull this watch off in a million years. It's simply too big, but that doesn't mean I can't appreciate it from afar. You aren't necessarily buying this for the looks, you're buying it because it's absolutely bulletproof and about as close to indestructible as a budget watch is ever going to get. It might be heresy, but this is also the style that I first think of when I hear the word G-Shock uttered, even more so than the classic square styling of the original 1983 5000 series. Before I'm crucified for not featuring a square G on the list, the only one I could find below $100 at the time of writing was from AliExpress. Otherwise, there definitely would be one here. This is currently my favourite G-Shock model. If you're a follower of the channel, you'll know I have a problem with buying too many of the octagonal variants, far more than is healthy, and as it stands, I think this is the best one. The main reason being its wearability. It's very small compared to regular G-Shock fare, meaning it fits me better, and as it isn't one of the metal upgraded versions, it's also comparatively light. The all black version you see here is admittedly not the most legible, but I won't hold that against the watch as there are clearer but less cool colourways available. So there we have it. I've kept saying I could make this list very easily, but I actually think it's more challenging than you might imagine, but not necessarily for the reasons you might imagine. I do think that there are some truly hideous Casio models. The top end of the Edifice line can at times look very much like Invicta models, and the same goes for some of the very pricey Mr. G lineup. However, a bad Casio model under $100 is actually really hard to find, and I could fully understand people making a strong argument for almost any of them being in a top 10 list like this. So let me know your thoughts on my list. What would you change about it? I've already mentioned the lack of a square G being problematic, but the cheapest new model I could find at the time of writing was $103. And that is me searching through the UK though. It may well be possible to get one cheaper stateside. At any rate, let's discuss your thoughts in the comments section below. As ever, thank you for your time. If you've enjoyed what you've seen or found it informative, consider dropping the video a like and subscribing for more content like this in future.